I am Alicia Cole, 35 years old. On the night I came home from a 12-hour hospital shift, I found an eviction notice taped to my front door, signed not by my landlord, but by my neighbors. The red letters screamed, "Vacate immediately," and below it was scrawled in their handwriting, "This block isn't for people like you." My hands shook so violently I dropped my keys, the metallic clatter echoing in the hallway of the building we all shared. The hallway smelled faintly of bleach and stale cigarettes. The fluorescent light above flickered, casting a jittery glow on the notice as if mocking me. My uniform still reeked of antiseptic and coffee, my scrubs clinging to me after the endless shift in the ER. Rain dripped from my hair onto the linoleum floor. But all I could see were those words that made me feel like a trespasser in the one place I should have felt safe. My chest tightened as if the walls themselves were pressing in, urging me to pack up and vanish. Before I share how this betrayal unfolded, let me know where you are watching from and subscribe if you value standing up for yourself. I tore the paper down with trembling hands, the tape ripping loud in the quiet hallway. My neighbor's door, the Martins, was cracked open just enough that I caught a glint of eyes watching me. The wood creaked as it closed quickly, and the click of the lock echoed louder than any insult they could have shouted. My blood boiled, shame burning hot beneath my skin. They wanted me to know it was them. I unlocked my door, stepped inside, and leaned against it, still gripping the crumpled paper. The condo smelled faintly of lavender from the candle I had left out days ago, but it felt different now. The soft yellow lamplight did nothing to ease the knot in my stomach. This wasn't some prank. This was war declared in handwriting. Growing up in Cincinnati, Ohio, I knew what it was like to feel unwanted. My parents split when I was 7. My father disappeared, and my mother worked double shifts at a grocery store to keep us afloat. We lived in a cramped 2-bedroom above that same store. I studied late nights at the kitchen table, listening to the hum of the refrigerators downstairs, promising myself that someday I would escape the feeling of being disposable. That promise carried me through nursing school. I was the first in my family to graduate college, the first to wear a white coat, the first to sign a mortgage with my own name. I worked overtime, skipped vacations, and saved every spare dollar until I could finally buy this modest condo. This place wasn't just walls and windows. It was proof that I had built a life on my own terms. But now, standing barefoot in my kitchen with that eviction notice in my hand, I felt like I was back in that old apartment, powerless to stop people from deciding whether I belonged. I read the words again. This block isn't for people like you. What did they mean? Because I worked nights and sometimes came home late? Because I lived alone while they paraded their picture-perfect family of 4? Because I was a Black woman who had worked too hard to own something they didn't think I deserved? Every possibility made my throat tighten further. I sat at the small wooden table where I usually ate quick dinners between shifts and smoothed the crumpled paper flat. My first instinct was to cry. My second was to call my landlord and scream. But then the nurse in me, the one who had to stay calm during chaos, took over. I grabbed my phone, snapped pictures of the notice, and emailed them to myself. Evidence. Documentation. A knock startled me. 3 sharp raps at the door. I froze, heart hammering. Another knock, louder. I opened it a sliver and saw Mrs. Patel, the elderly widow from down the hall. Her silver hair was tied in a bun, her thin frame wrapped in a knitted shawl. "Alicia," she whispered urgently, glancing up and down the hallway. "Don't let them scare you. You saw?" My voice cracked. "I hear everything in this building," she said. "They've been whispering about you since the day you moved in. Too young, too independent, too different." She shook her head. "It's jealousy, nothing more." The kindness in her eyes nearly undid me. "Thank you," I managed. She reached out, squeezed my hand, and then slipped back into her apartment, leaving the scent of cardamom tea lingering in the air. Alone again, I sank into my chair, the paper still on the table. This wasn't just about me. This was about power, about who they thought had the right to claim space here. And I wasn't going to surrender mine. I pulled out my journal, the same leather-bound one I'd used to track goals since nursing school. On the fresh page, I wrote, "They think they can evict me. They think wrong. Document everything. Stay calm. Fight smart," I underlined it twice. The night stretched on. I reheated leftover soup, scrolled through emails from the hospital, tried to pretend life was normal, but every creak in the hallway felt like footsteps coming for me. At one point, I swore I heard whispering outside my door. My name hissed like a curse. But when I looked through the peephole, the hall was empty. By midnight, exhaustion finally dragged me to bed, but sleep never came easy. Images of that red-lettered notice burned behind my eyelids. Every time I drifted off, I woke with my heart racing, convinced I'd hear pounding at my door. And in those restless hours, one truth settled like stone in my chest. The Martins hadn't just attacked me with paper and ink. They had attacked my sense of belonging. That was something I could never forgive. I wish I could say the eviction notice came out of nowhere, but looking back, the signs were there from the start. The Martins, the couple across the hall, had been sizing me up since the day I moved in. Their smiles never quite reached their eyes, and every friendly comment came laced with something sharp, something meant to remind me that I wasn't like them. The first time I met them, I had just finished hauling the last of my boxes up the narrow stairwell. My arms ached, sweat dripped down my back, and all I wanted was a glass of water. That's when their door swung open. "Moving in?" Mr. Martin asked, his voice flat as his eyes scanned me from head to toe. "Yes," I said, forcing a polite smile. "I'm Alicia, just bought 3B. His wife, a tall blonde with a pearl necklace snug around her throat, leaned against the doorframe. "Oh, you bought? Well, isn't that ambitious? Most young people just rent." The way she said it, ambitious, felt less like a compliment and more like an accusation. "I worked for it," I replied evenly. They exchanged a look, one of those silent conversations married couples have, and then she said, "Welcome to the building. It's quiet here. We like it that way." I told myself not to read too much into it, but their eyes lingered a little too long, their smiles a little too tight. Over the next few weeks, the little digs became routine. If I came home late from a hospital shift, I'd hear their door creak open. Mrs. Martin's voice would float down the hall. "Some of us need our sleep." Loud enough for me to hear, quiet enough that she could pretend it wasn't meant for me. Once, I was carrying groceries up the stairs when Mr. Martin passed by. He glanced at the bags in my arms, then at my uniform, and said, "Long hours, huh? Must be tough to keep a place nice when you're never home." I wanted to snap back, but years in the ER had taught me restraint. Instead, I said, "I managed just fine," and walked past him. But his smirk followed me all the way to my door. Then came the petty complaints. Notes slipped under my door about excessive noise, when all I'd done was drop a pan in the kitchen. A text forwarded from the landlord saying someone had complained about the strong cooking odors in the hallway. My mother's curry recipe, the same one neighbors back home used to beg for. It became obvious the Martins had taken it upon themselves to monitor me. They watched who visited, how long I stayed out, even the delivery drivers who brought me groceries when my shifts ran too long. One night, I opened the door to find Mrs. Martin crouched low, pretending to check her doormat, though her eyes flicked straight to my packages. She flushed and scurried inside when she saw me watching. At first, I chalked it up to nosiness. Every building had neighbors who couldn't mind their own business. But then came the whispers. Mrs. Patel, kind as ever, was the first to warn me. "They've been talking about you," she said one evening as we rode the elevator together. "Talking how?" I asked, gripping the railing. She hesitated, then sighed. "They say you bring trouble, that you're loud, that you don't respect the building. Lies, of course, but people believe what they hear often enough." I swallowed hard. Trouble. That's what they wanted to brand me as. After that, I noticed the way other neighbors started looking at me. The couple from 2A who used to wave cheerfully now avoided eye contact. The old man who walked, his dog each morning began pulling the leash, tighter when passing me in the lobby. The Martins were building a case against me long before they slapped that fake eviction notice on my door. It all boiled over one Sunday afternoon. I had finally gotten a weekend off and decided to clean. Music played softly on my speaker, barely above a whisper compared to the chaos of the ER. I was scrubbing the counters when a pounding shook my door. I opened it to find Mrs. Martin, Arms crossed, lips curled in disdain. "Some of us value peace and quiet," she snapped. I blinked. "The music's barely on." "It's inconsiderate," she shot back. "And we don't appreciate certain smells coming from your unit." Her meaning was clear. My culture, my food, my life. I gritted my teeth. "With all due respect, I'm not breaking any rules." She leaned closer, her perfume sharp and cloying. "Rules aren't everything. This building has a standard. You don't belong here." The words cut deep, sharper than I wanted to admit. I slammed the door before she could see my hands shaking. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the weight of her words pressing down. I had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to be told I didn't belong. But deep down, a seed of doubt sprouted. Was I really welcome here? I remembered my mother's voice from years ago, when classmates mocked my secondhand clothes. "Hold your head high, Alicia. Their words can't take away your worth." But the Martins weren't just words. They were plotting, scheming, trying to push me out, and I could feel it building, like a storm waiting to break. The next morning, as I left for work, I caught them talking to the landlord in the lobby. Their voices hushed when I walked in, but I heard enough. "She doesn't fit here. Always problems. You should reconsider who you allow." The landlord's eyes flicked to me, uneasy, and in that moment, I knew the Martins weren't just trying to annoy me. They were trying to erase me. I walked past them, head high, but inside, a fire lit. If they wanted a fight, they had chosen the wrong neighbor. The eviction notice was the spark, but the fire had been smoldering for weeks. Every time I thought maybe I was imagining their malice, the Martins found new ways to remind me I wasn't welcome. It started with the mail. One morning I came home after a grueling 12-hour shift to find my mailbox stuffed to bursting with flyers, pizza menus, and junk. At first I thought maybe the postman had a rough day, but then I noticed 2 bills missing, my utility statement and a letter from my bank. Later I found both crumpled on the floor of the lobby. The envelopes had been ripped, fingerprints smudging the edges. When I confronted the landlord about it, he just sighed. "Mail gets mixed up sometimes," he muttered, avoiding my eyes. But I knew better. My other neighbors' boxes were pristine, only mine looked rifled through. Then came the parking mistakes. I owned a modest Honda Civic, always parked neatly in my assigned spot. But twice in 1 week, I found nasty notes tucked under my windshield wiper. "Don't take spaces that aren't yours." Both times, the Martins' shiny black SUV was nosed into my spot. When I knocked on their door to address it, Mrs. Martin smiled sweetly and said, "Oh, must have been a mix-up. These things happen." The smug tilt of her chin told me it wasn't a mistake at all. Still, I tried to keep my head down. I worked too many hours to waste energy on every petty battle. But soon, the whisper campaign grew louder. One night, as I walked through the lobby, I caught 2 women from the second floor mid-conversation. "I heard she's behind on her mortgage," one said. Her voice hushed, but not enough. "That's what happens when people live beyond their means," the other replied. They froze when they saw me, eyes darting anywhere but my face, my hands clenched around my tote bag, my pulse thudding in my ears. I wanted to scream at them that I'd never missed a payment, that I worked harder than anyone in this building. But I swallowed it down. In the ER, I'd seen what happened when people let anger cloud judgment. You lose focus, you make mistakes, and mistakes could cost lives. I wouldn't give the Martins the satisfaction of seeing me unravel. But inside, the pressure was mounting. It wasn't just the gossip. It was the silence. The way neighbors I'd once exchanged friendly nods with now looked away in the hall. The way kids stopped waving at me from the stairwell. Even Mrs. Patel, who had always been kind, seemed nervous to linger too long in conversation. One evening, she slipped me a folded note in the elevator. "Be careful. They're talking to the board, the condo board." My stomach dropped. When I first bought the unit, the realtor had breezed past the mention of the board, calling it a formality. A group of residents who handled maintenance decisions and enforced bylaws. I hadn't thought much of it. Now, I realized the Martins had found their battlefield. At the next board meeting, I forced myself to attend. The room was a cramped basement lounge with folding chairs arranged in a circle. The Martins sat front and center, their expressions serene, as though they were about to deliver a sermon. The president, a balding man with thick glasses, shuffled papers. "We've received some complaints," he began. My palms sweated. "Complaints?" Mr. Martin cleared his throat. "Several, actually. Noise disturbances, strong odors, misuse of parking spaces, all patterns of behavior that disrupt the harmony of our building." "That's not true," I said sharply. "I've followed every rule." Mrs. Martin tilted her head, feigning pity. "Perhaps you don't realize how disruptive you've been. It's not about rules. It's about respect for your neighbors." Murmurs rippled through the room. Some nodded along. Others avoided my eyes. I took a deep breath, steadying my voice. "I am a nurse. I work long hours to keep this community safe. I pay my mortgage on time. I don't break bylaws. This is harassment." The board president coughed. "Well, we'll need to review all claims fairly. But I must remind you, Ms. Cole, repeated complaints can be grounds for action. Action." The word rang like a gavel. When the meeting adjourned, the Martins brushed past me, their smiles sharp as knives. "Nothing personal," Mrs. Martin whispered. "We just want what's best for everyone." I walked home with shaking hands. They weren't just being petty anymore. They were building a legal case, one that could strip me of my home. That night, I couldn't sleep. The walls of my condo felt less like shelter and more like a cage closing in. I kept replaying the meeting in my mind. The way the Martins' lies had been accepted as fact, while my truth was treated as mere defense. I thought of my mother again, how she had once stood up to a landlord who tried to hike our rent illegally. She hadn't been educated in law, but she'd gone to the library, researched tenant rights, and marched into his office armed with knowledge. She won. We stayed in that little apartment until I left for college. Maybe it was time I stopped playing defense. The next morning, I called a lawyer. Her name was Sandra Wu, a sharp-voiced woman who didn't waste words. After I explained everything, she said, "Document everything. Dates, times, witnesses. They want a war? We'll give them the paperwork kind." Her confidence steadied me. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't alone. But the Martins didn't slow down. In fact, they escalated. I began finding trash bags ripped open outside my door. Once, someone smeared something sticky across my doorknob. Honey, I think. Ants swarmed by morning, and then, the worst blow yet. One Friday evening, exhausted after a double shift, I returned home to find my electricity shut off. My fridge hummed silent, my apartment dark. Panic surged. Had I missed a bill? No. I checked my bank app. Payment cleared 2 weeks earlier. When I called the utility company, the operator sounded confused. "Our records show the account holder requested termination." My grip tightened on the phone. "I am the account holder." There was a pause then. "The request was submitted with your name and address." I hung up, fury coursing through me. There was only one explanation. The Martins hadn't just been spreading lies. They had forged a request to cut off my power. That night, I sat in the dark, the glow of my phone the only light. The pressure had become unbearable. They wanted me gone, and they were willing to stoop to fraud to make it happen. But as I stared into the shadows of my apartment, something hardened inside me. They thought they could crush me with lies, isolate me with whispers, drown me in paperwork. They had underestimated the wrong woman. The night without power was a turning point. I sat cross-legged on the floor, candles flickering against the walls, listening to the faint hum of the Martins' TV through the ceiling. My fridge was silent, my food spoiling by the hour, while they carried on upstairs as if nothing had happened, my stomach clenched with equal parts hunger and rage. The next morning, I showered at the hospital after my shift, too ashamed to admit to anyone why I needed to. On my way back, I passed Mrs. Martin in the lobby. She wore her usual smug smile, a reusable shopping bag hooked over her arm. "Lights out last night?" she asked sweetly. Shame how unreliable these old buildings can be, I wanted to scream. Instead, I clenched my teeth and walked past her. But the fury inside me was reaching a dangerous boil. The breaking point came a week later. I had just returned from another long day, my scrubs wrinkled, my hair pinned in a messy bun. As I pushed open my door, a wave of stench hit me so hard my eyes watered. My living room was littered with garbage bags, raw meat, spoiled milk cartons, fast food wrappers, all dumped through the small mail slot in my door. I dropped my bag, gagging as flies buzzed around the mess. My breath came in shallow gasps. Tears of frustration stung my eyes. I sank to my knees, the weight of it all crashing down. The notices, the lies, the board meetings, the mail, the electricity. And now this violation of the one place I thought I could still feel safe. My hands trembled as I dialed Sandra, my lawyer. "They broke into my home with garbage," I said, my voice shaking. "Alicia, listen to me," she said firmly. "This is harassment escalating to criminal activity. You need to call the police. File a report. Tonight." For a long moment, I just sat there, staring at the chaos in my apartment. Part of me wanted to crawl into bed, bury myself under blankets, and let it all swallow me. But another part, the part of me that had pushed through nursing school, that had held dying patients' hands through the night, knew Sandra was right. I called the police. When the officer arrived, his flashlight swept over the garbage-strewn floor. He scribbled in his notebook, his expression unreadable. "Looks like someone's targeting you," he said. "No kidding," I muttered. "Do you have suspects?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "My upstairs neighbors. The Martins," the officer raised an eyebrow. "Any proof?" I faltered. "Proof. I had suspicion, patterns, motive, but no concrete evidence." "We'll file a report," he said finally. "But without witnesses or cameras, there's not much we can do." Defeat curled in my gut like poison. I walked him out, my shoulders slumped. As the door clicked shut behind him, I leaned against it, my eyes burning. I couldn't live like this anymore. That night, I barely slept. My mind churned with every insult, every whisper, every cruel smile from the Martins. By dawn, something inside me snapped into clarity. If they wanted me broken, they'd failed. I wouldn't crumble. I would fight. But not with screaming matches or desperate pleas. No, I would fight with strategy, with patience, with the same precision I used in the ER when seconds meant lives. First, I bought cameras, tiny, motion-activated devices hidden near my door, my windows, even inside my living room aimed at the mail slot. It drained my savings, but it was worth it. Second, I began a log. Every incident, every whisper, every suspicious glance was documented with dates, times, and details. Sandra had told me documentation was my weapon, and I wielded it like a scalpel. Third, I reached out to allies. Mrs. Patel agreed to quietly support me, slipping me notes whenever she overheard gossip. A younger neighbor, Kevin, confessed he'd seen the Martins loitering near my door when they thought no one was watching. Slowly, a quiet coalition formed, willing to testify if needed. But the Martins didn't know any of this. To them, I was still the woman cowering under their harassment, sitting alone in a garbage-strewn apartment. Then came the night I caught them. It was 2 a.m. My apartment cloaked in darkness, except for the glow of my hidden camera's tiny red light. A faint scraping sound jolted me awake. Heart pounding, I slipped out of bed and tiptoed to the living room. Through the peephole, I saw them. Mr. Martin crouched at my door, a bag of trash in his hands, Mrs. Martin whispering urgently behind him. My camera blinked, recording every second. The rage that surged through me was volcanic, but I didn't open the door. I let the evidence gather. When they finally slunk away, I checked the footage. Crystal clear, their faces, their actions undeniable. The next morning, I sent the video to Sandra. Her reply came within minutes. "This changes everything." For the first time in months, hope swelled in my chest. But even as victory edged closer, the breaking point had left scars. I found myself double-checking locks, jumping at shadows, scanning every corner of the lobby for their figures. My sanctuary still felt tainted. One evening, as I scrubbed the last sticky residue off my floor, I caught my reflection in the window. My eyes were tired, yes, but sharper, stronger. The Martins had pushed me to the edge, but I hadn't fallen. They had no idea that their cruelty had only awakened the part of me they should fear. Most, the part that refused to be erased, the Thai video of the Martins crouched. At my door became the centerpiece of everything. I watched it again and again, memorizing every detail. The way Mr. Martin's shoulders hunched. The way his wife kept glancing over her shoulder. The faint whisper of, "Hurry," someone might see. Each second of that footage was proof, and proof was power. Sandra's voice on the phone was firm. "We have them now. But listen carefully, Alicia. We don't rush, we build. We stack evidence like bricks until their house of lies collapses on them." Her words settled deep inside me. For weeks I had felt reactive, scrambling to survive each attack. But now, for the first time, I felt in control. This wasn't just about defending myself, it was about strategy. The plan began quietly. I bought a second set of cameras, placing them in the stairwell and even inside a decorative plant by the lobby mailboxes. They were small enough to go unnoticed, but powerful enough to capture movement and sound. I wanted every angle covered. At night, I logged incidents like a ritual. Every slammed door, every poisoned whisper in the hallway, every time they hovered too close to my door. Kevin, my younger neighbor, started texting me updates whenever he spotted them sneaking around. Mrs. Patel left sticky notes in my mailbox with times she overheard them gossiping about getting Alicia out. Piece by piece, my file grew. But evidence alone wouldn't change the power dynamics. The Martins were still board members, still charming to outsiders, still seen as pillars of the community. I needed to shift perception, to make their cruelty visible to everyone. That's when I thought of the newsletter. Every month, the condo board sent a digital update to all residents, highlighting repairs, reminders, and community notes. Mr. Martin usually drafted it, but Sandra suggested I attend the next open meeting, armed with questions about transparency and harassment policies. "Make them answer in front of witnesses," she said. "Even if they dodge, people will notice." The night of the meeting, I wore my hospital ID badge around my neck, not because I needed it, but because it reminded people who I was, a nurse, someone who served the community. The Martins sat smug at the front table. When the floor opened for questions, I raised my hand. "What protections are in place for residents facing harassment from other tenants?" I asked, my voice steady. A murmur rippled through the room. The Martins exchanged a glance. Mrs. Martin forced a smile. "Well, Alicia, we've never really had issues like that here. Our community is supportive." "That's not true," Kevin spoke up suddenly from the back row. "I've seen you harass her," the room gasped. My heart leapt. Mrs. Martin's smile cracked. "Excuse me?" Kevin stood taller. "You've been targeting her for months. I've seen you hanging around her door. Everyone whispers about it." The silence that followed was heavy. My pulse hammered, but I stayed calm, letting the weight of Kevin's words hang in the air. I didn't reveal the footage yet. That would come later at the right moment. For now, suspicion was enough. People left the meeting whispering, casting sideways glances at the Martins. The pedestal they stood on was beginning to wobble. Back in my apartment, I exhaled shakily, my body buzzing from the adrenaline. My plan was working, but it was only the beginning. The Martins retaliated 2 days later. When I came home, a spray-painted message covered my door. "Get out." The red paint dripped down like blood. My hands shook as I snapped photos, my heart pounding. Sandra's response was immediate. "Good. Document everything. They're doing half our work for us." So I cleaned the paint, filed another report, and waited. Behind the scenes, Sandra drafted formal complaints to the condo board and prepped legal documents. We gathered witness statements from Mrs. Patel and Kevin, combining them with the footage. The case was becoming airtight. But strategy wasn't just legal. It was psychological. I stopped reacting in public. When Mrs. Martin smirked at me in the lobby, I smiled back serenely. When Mr. Martin muttered insults under his breath, I pretended not to hear. My calm unnerved them. They wanted me rattled, desperate. Instead, I looked composed, untouchable. And slowly, the tide of opinion shifted. Other neighbors began nodding to me in the hallway, small gestures of solidarity. Someone left flowers at my door with a note. "We believe you." The Martins must have sensed it too, because their behavior grew more frantic. The garbage came more often, the whispers louder, the glares sharper. They were unraveling, and I was recording every second. Late one night, I sat at my table surrounded by files, photos, and flash drives. The evidence felt like armor, each piece a shield against their lies. But beneath the relief was exhaustion. I wanted my life back. Quiet mornings, safe evenings, the peace of knowing my home was mine. That was when Sandra called with the next step. "It's time," she said. "We'll request an emergency hearing with the housing authority. With the footage, the witness statements, the police reports, we can force this into the open." My chest tightened. "Do you think we'll win?" Sandra didn't hesitate. "Alicia, with what we've built, they don't stand a chance." I hung up, staring at the files spread before me. The plan was set. The Martins thought they could bully me out. But soon, they'd be the ones cornered, their lies exposed under a light they couldn't control. For the first time in months, I slept without fear. My plan wasn't just to survive. My plan was to reclaim everything they tried to take from me, and make sure they regretted ever underestimating me. The morning of the hearing, I woke up before dawn. My alarm hadn't even rung yet, but my body was buzzing, restless. I brewed coffee, the bitter steam filling my small kitchen, and set my outfit carefully on the chair. Navy slacks, a white blouse, my hospital ID badge clipped to the pocket. I wanted to look professional, credible, untouchable. Outside, the city was still waking, gray light streaking across the streets. My stomach knotted, not from doubt, but from anticipation. Months of harassment, nights of fear, endless documentation, all of it had led to this. Sandra picked me up at 8 sharp. She was as composed as ever, files neatly stacked in her leather case. "Today's the day," she said, her voice steady. "Stay calm, answer honestly, and let the evidence speak for itself." The housing authority building loomed tall, glass reflecting the overcast sky. Inside, the waiting room hummed with low conversations and the squeak of shoes against polished floors. My palms were damp, but Sandra's reassuring nod grounded me. And then they arrived. The Martins swept in like they owned the place. Mr. Martin wore a sharp suit, his tie a little too bright, while Mrs. Martin clutched a designer purse as if it were armor. Their smiles were brittle, their confidence forced. But when Mrs. Martin spotted me, her expression twisted into a smirk that said, "We'll crush you." We were called into the chamber. A panel of 3 housing authority officials sat at the front, papers spread across their desks. The air felt heavy, as though the walls themselves held the weight of every grievance ever heard within them. "Case number 472, the clerk announced. Cole versus Martin." Sandra stood first. Her voice was clear, unwavering. "We are here today because my client, Ms. Alicia Cole, has faced targeted harassment, intimidation, and unlawful attempts of eviction by her neighbors, Mr. and Mrs. Martin. We will demonstrate their misconduct through video evidence, witness testimony, and documented reports." The Martins' lawyer, a man with slicked back hair, rose with a confident smile. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we have here is nothing more than a neighborly misunderstanding. My clients merely expressed concerns about Ms. Cole's suitability as a resident. There was no harassment, no malice, just community members ensuring the safety of their building." I clenched my fists under the table. Suitability? Safety? They had painted me as a threat to my own home. Sandra began with the footage. The screen flickered to life, showing the grainy clip of the Martins crouching by my door, sliding the false eviction notice into place. Their faces were unmistakable, their whispers audible. Gasps filled the chamber. "Please note the timestamp," Sandra said firmly. "This was recorded at 11:46 p.m., long after quiet hours. Note also the handwriting comparison between this fabricated notice and Mrs. Martin's prior written communications." The officials leaned forward, scribbling notes. The Martins' lawyer shifted uneasily before rising. Surely this could have been taken out of context. Perhaps they were checking on a maintenance issue. But then the audio played. Mrs. Martin's voice, clear and sharp. "Hurry! Someone might see." The lawyer faltered. The room buzzed with whispers. Next came witness testimony. Kevin stood tall, though I could see his hands tremble slightly as he swore to tell the truth. I live 2 doors down. I've seen the Martins linger outside Alicia's apartment. I've heard them talking about driving her out. It wasn't once. It was constant, Mrs. Patel added her voice. They poisoned the atmosphere of our building. Always gossiping, always spreading lies. Alicia kept to herself. She was never the problem. They were. Each statement was another crack in the Martins' facade. When it was my turn, my knees felt weak, but I forced myself to stand. I bought my condo a year ago. I worked double shifts as a nurse to afford it. Since moving in, I have paid every bill on time, followed every rule. Yet I was made to feel like an intruder in my own home. The Martins left notes, spread rumors, vandalized my door. I lived in fear every single day. My voice caught, but I steadied it. All I wanted was peace. Instead, I got war. Silence followed my words. Even the Martins avoided my eyes. Their lawyer scrambled, presenting flimsy claims that I had been hostile and uncooperative. But without evidence, his words rang hollow. When asked directly by the panel if they had ever posted an eviction notice themselves, the Martins hesitated. Their denial was weak, undercut by the footage already shown. By noon, the hearing closed. The panel announced they would deliberate and issue a decision within 2 weeks. As we stepped outside, the Martins stormed past us. Mrs. Martin hissed, "You think this is over? You'll regret ever crossing us." Sandra met her glare with steel. "No, Mrs. Martin. That's exactly what you'll be saying about yourself." The gray sky had broken into sunlight, the brightness sharp after the heavy air of the chamber. I breathed deep, the weight on my chest lighter than it had been in months. That night, I sat by my window, watching the city lights flicker on one by one. For the first time, I believed in the possibility of victory. The Martins weren't invincible. Their lies had been dragged into the light, and truth was finally on my side. But deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The hearing was a battle, not the war. The Martins still had influence, still had pride, and I knew they wouldn't go quietly. Yet as I turned off the light and slipped into bed, I whispered to myself, "I'm ready. Whatever comes next, I'm ready." 2 weeks felt like a lifetime. Each day that passed after the hearing seemed stretched thin with tension. Every time I walked down the hall, I half expected another note, another cruel whisper, another trap waiting for me. But the Martins stayed oddly quiet. No snide comments, no door slams, no footsteps pacing outside my apartment. The silence was almost more unnerving than their usual hostility. Then, on a Wednesday morning, the decision arrived. I opened the envelope with trembling hands. The words blurred at first, my heart pounding in my ears, but then clarity came. The panel finds in favor of Ms. Alicia Cole. Mr. and Mrs. Martin are hereby sanctioned for harassment, falsification of documents, and disruption of tenant peace. I reread the sentence twice, 3 times, savoring each word. Relief washed over me like a tidal wave. They had lost. I had won. Sandra called me an hour later. "It's official," she said, a smile audible in her voice. "The Martins have been fined, ordered to pay your legal fees, and put on probation with the housing authority. Any further misconduct could result in eviction from them." I almost dropped my phone. "Eviction? You mean—" "Yes," she confirmed. "If they step out of line again, they could lose their condo. You're safe now, Alicia. Really safe." For the first time in months, I laughed. It wasn't bitter or forced. It was free, unrestrained. But the Martins didn't take their punishment quietly. The very next day, rumors began to swirl in the building. Kevin caught up with me in the lobby. "They're telling people you manipulated the system," he warned. "That you lied, that you staged the video. They're desperate, Alicia. Desperate people get messy." Mrs. Patel chimed in later, knocking gently at my door. "Don't let their poison touch you. The truth is already out. People saw the footage. They know who the liars are." I nodded, but inside a knot of unease twisted. The Martins were cornered animals now, and cornered animals lash out. Sure enough, cracks began to show. I overheard their arguments late at night, muffled through the walls. Mrs. Martin's voice was sharp, accusing. Mr. Martin's tone was defensive, sometimes breaking into shouts. Dishes clattered. Doors slammed. The once perfect, polished couple was unraveling before everyone's eyes. One evening, as I checked my mailbox, I caught sight of Mrs. Martin in the lobby. Her makeup was smudged, her hair unkempt. She muttered into her phone, pacing, her words laced with venom. "We can't afford another fine, Richard. Do you understand? They'll throw us out. And it's your fault for letting her catch us on camera." She froze when she noticed me. Her face hardened, but for the first time, I saw something else in her eyes. Not arrogance, not superiority. Fear. "Enjoy your little victory," she hissed. "But don't think for a second this is over." I held her gaze. "You're right," I said evenly. "It's not over. Not until you stop trying to destroy me." She didn't reply. She just stormed past me, heels clattering against the tile. The building began to turn against them. Where once neighbors nodded politely at the Martins, now conversations hushed when they entered a room. Parents pulled their children closer. Invitations to gatherings dried up. The Martins, who had thrived on gossip and control, suddenly found themselves isolated. One afternoon, Kevin stopped by with groceries. "Figured you could use a break," he said, handing me a bag of apples and bread. "By the way, you should know, people are on your side now. They're tired of the Martins' games. It's about time someone stood up to them." I blinked back tears. "Thank you, Kevin. Really." Support began to ripple in ways I hadn't expected. A group of tenants even drafted a petition demanding stricter oversight on harassment cases, citing mine as an example. The housing board acknowledged it, promising to review policies. My fight had sparked something bigger than me. Meanwhile, the Martins' desperation grew louder. One night, I returned home to find Mrs. Martin screaming in the hallway at Mr. Martin. "You've ruined us," she shrieked. "All because you couldn't keep your mouth shut. Do you know what people are saying about me? About us?" Mr. Martin's face was pale, his jaw clenched. "You were the one who insisted we get rid of her. You wanted her gone, not me." Their words echoed down the corridor, drawing curious glances from behind cracked doors. For the first time, their perfect facade was crumbling in public. And I realized something then. Their power hadn't come from wealth or influence. It had come from fear. They had controlled others by making them afraid. But now, stripped of that, they were nothing more than two bitter people trapped in their own mess. Still, I stayed cautious. I kept documenting everything. Every word, every look, every encounter. I wasn't going to let them claw back control through lies. Then, one Saturday morning, I received an unexpected knock. Sandra stood there, holding a new document. "Thought you'd like to see this," she said, handing it to me. It was an official warning issued to the Martins after yet another complaint, this time from Mrs. Patel, who had caught them trying to intimidate her in the laundry room. 3 strikes, Sandra explained. "They're running out of chances. If they keep this up, the board won't hesitate to evict them." My heart raced. Could it really happen? Could the very people who had tried to drive me out end up losing everything instead? That night, I sat by my window again, city lights twinkling like scattered stars. I thought about the months of fear, the exhaustion, the nights I'd cried myself to sleep. I thought about the Martins' smug faces when they believed they could erase me. And then I thought about where we were now. Neighbors rallying, the Martins unraveling. Justice wasn't complete yet, but it was closer than ever. For the first time, I didn't just feel relief. I felt power. And I knew this story wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about watching the people who had tried to break me finally crumble under the weight of their own cruelty. The building board didn't waste time. Within a week of Mrs. Patel's complaint, they scheduled an emergency meeting to decide the Martins' fate. Word spread quickly. By the time the notice went up on the lobby bulletin board, neighbors were already whispering in elevators and hallways. Some looked nervous, but most looked eager, almost relieved. The Martins had thrown their weight around for too long, and now, it seemed, their empire was collapsing. I sat in the meeting hall that Friday evening, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly above us. Rows of metal chairs scraped against the floor as tenants filled the room. Even Kevin, who rarely attended these gatherings, leaned close and whispered, This is it, Alicia. Tonight decides everything. At the front sat the board, 5 members, stern-faced, papers stacked in front of them. Sandra stood to my left, calm but firm, her file folder thick with evidence. Across from us, the Martins entered like actors clinging to their final scene. Mrs. Martin wore a stiff navy dress, her lips pursed in a tight line. Mr. Martin's eyes darted around, searching for allies that no longer existed. The chairwoman cleared her throat. We are here to address the matter of repeated harassment and misconduct by Richard and Elaine Martin against their neighbor, Ms. Alicia Cole, as well as others in this building. Evidence has been presented, and tonight both parties will have the opportunity to speak. Mrs. Martin rose first, voice sharp, rehearsed. This is nothing but a smear campaign. Alicia has twisted innocent interactions into harassment. She fabricated that video. It's obvious when you watch it closely. My husband and I are pillars of this community. We've lived here longer than half the people in this room. Her words echoed, but they fell flat. I scanned the audience. Neighbors shook their heads, crossed their arms, whispered with disbelief. The tide had turned, and she could feel it. Her cheeks flushed, but she pressed on, throwing accusations like daggers. When my turn came, I stood slowly. My hands trembled, but my voice did not. For months I've endured intimidation, slander, and attempts to force me out of my home. Not because I broke any rules, but because the Martins decided I didn't belong here. The video wasn't fabricated. You all saw it. Their signatures on the fake eviction notice weren't forged. And the testimonies of neighbors, many of you sitting here tonight, prove I am not the only one they've targeted. I paused, letting silence fill the room. This isn't just about me. It's about making sure no one else here ever has to fear their neighbors again. Sandra stepped forward, laying down copies of complaints from others. Mrs. Patel's account, Kevin's statement, even an email from a young couple on the 3rd floor who had moved out months earlier after enduring the Martins' constant bullying. The board listened intently, scribbling notes. Finally, the chairwoman spoke. Mr. and Mrs. Martin, we've reviewed overwhelming evidence. You have been found in violation of building policy on multiple counts: falsification of documents, harassment of tenants, and disruption of community peace. Effective immediately, you are given 30 days to vacate your residence. The words landed like a gavel. Gasps rippled through the room. Kevin let out a low whistle. Mrs. Patel's eyes sparkled with vindication. For me, it felt like the air I'd been holding for months finally released. Mrs. Martin shot to her feet, her voice shrill. This is outrageous. We're being punished because she pointed a shaking finger at me, her facade cracking. She turned everyone against us. The chairwoman's voice was steady, final. No, Mrs. Martin, you did that yourselves. Mr. Martin slumped in his chair, head in his hands. Mrs. Martin's fury melted into desperation. We'll appeal. We'll fight this, she cried. But even her husband didn't echo the words. The meeting adjourned with murmurs of disbelief and relief swirling through the crowd. As I stepped into the hallway, Kevin clapped me on the back. You did it, Alicia. You actually did it. But as we walked out, I caught sight of Mrs. Martin lingering in the doorway. Her eyes were wild, unhinged. This isn't the end, she whispered harshly. You think you've won, but you've just made enemies you'll regret. I didn't flinch. For the first time, her threats felt empty, like a blade dulled by overuse. The difference now, I said evenly, is that no one believes you anymore. That night, I returned to my apartment and sat by the window. The city lights twinkled far below, the hum of traffic steady, soothing. For months I had felt trapped, hunted, but now, justice had been served. The Martins would pack their bags, leave the walls they once patrolled with smug authority, and face the reality they had tried to force on me. Still, I knew it wasn't quite over. 30 days was plenty of time for them to lash out, to stir trouble one last time. But I wasn't afraid anymore. They had been exposed. Their power was gone. I picked up my phone and texted Sandra. Thank you for believing me when no one else did. Her reply came instantly. You believed in yourself first, Alicia. That's what made the difference. For the first time in a long while, I went to bed with a smile. But little did I know, the Martins' downfall had only just begun. their secrets, their lies, their carefully constructed image. It was all about to unravel in public, far beyond the walls of this building. The Martins' 30 days passed faster than anyone expected. At first, they clung to their old routines, strutting through the hallways as if nothing had changed. But the shift was obvious. Where once neighbors avoided their gaze, now they met it with open disdain. Conversations stopped when they entered the lobby. No one moved aside to give them space. Even the doorman, who used to greet them with polite stiffness, now barely lifted his head. I would see them lugging boxes to their car late at night. Mrs. Martin's once flawless hair unkempt. Mr. Martin's shoulders slumped. They tried to keep up appearances, but their mask was cracking. Sandra told me the board had rejected their appeal within hours. "They have no ground to stand on," she said. The evidence was too strong. The day of their departure, the building buzzed with quiet anticipation. Curtains twitched as neighbors peeked out. Children whispered in hushed tones. Even Mrs. Patel came down to sit in the lobby, a mischievous twinkle in her eye. By noon, movers hauled furniture through the hallways. The Martins stood in the middle of the chaos, barking half-hearted orders. Mrs. Martin snapped at the movers when a box was dropped, but her voice cracked under the strain. Mr. Martin signed paperwork with trembling hands. They were shadows of the people who once ruled the building with iron fists. I stayed in my apartment, watching from my window. It wasn't gloating, not exactly. It was closure. Every slam of a moving truck door felt like a piece of weight lifting off my chest. Kevin knocked on my door mid-afternoon with a grin. "They're finally gone," he said. "Do you feel it? The whole building feels lighter." But the Martin story didn't end with their eviction. News of their downfall spread beyond our walls. Sandra, ever the strategist, had tipped off a local journalist who had been following cases of housing harassment. A week later, an article appeared. "From power to pariah, couple forced out after harassment scandal." The piece included interviews with several tenants, details from the board meeting, even a screenshot of the fake eviction notice. My name wasn't mentioned, but everyone who lived there knew. The Martins, once so proud of their reputation, became a cautionary tale. Their faces, once smiling in HOA newsletters, now circulated with headlines that branded them bullies. Soon after, I heard from Mrs. Patel that Mr. Martin lost his job at a local real estate firm. "No company wants to be associated with a scandal like this," she explained. "Especially not in property management." Mrs. Martin, who had run a small interior design business, began losing clients. Word of mouth spread quickly in our community. No one wanted someone who forged documents and harassed neighbors working in their home. It wasn't just their professional lives. Friends they had once bragged about stopped calling. At the grocery store, people whispered when they walked past. One afternoon, I passed them on the street. Mrs. Martin's eyes flicked to me, but instead of the venom I expected, there was something hollow. Shame, maybe, or anger turned inward. Mr. Martin didn't look at me at all. For me, life began to settle into something normal again. I could walk into the lobby without fear. I hosted Sandra and Kevin for coffee in my apartment, laughter echoing through the space that had once felt suffocating. Even Mrs. Patel dropped by, bearing a tin of homemade sweets. "You brought peace back to us," she said, squeezing my hand. But with peace came reflection. Late at night, I would sit by the window and think about how close I had come to giving up. There were moments, back when the Martins campaign was at its height, when I thought about selling, running, starting over somewhere else. If I had, they would have won. That thought chilled me more than anything. One evening, Sandra joined me for tea. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "what you did isn't just about you. You set a precedent. People are going to think twice before trying to intimidate their neighbors like that again." I smiled faintly. I didn't want to be anyone's precedent. I just wanted to keep my home. "Sometimes," she replied, "that's how change starts. Ordinary people refusing to be pushed out." Meanwhile, the Martins' spiral continued. Rumors circulated that they had moved into a cramped rental on the outskirts of town. Mrs. Patel claimed she'd seen Mrs. Martin at the bargain store, haggling over canned goods. Kevin said Mr. Martin had been spotted taking on part-time delivery work. No one said it outright, but we all knew. They had fallen hard. And yet, despite everything, I couldn't summon pure satisfaction. Relief, yes, Justice, absolutely. But watching two people unravel, even ones who had tormented me, carried a strange melancholy. They had chosen this path, but it was still a tragedy of their own making. One rainy Saturday, as I came back from grocery shopping, I noticed a small envelope tucked under my door. My stomach tightened, but when I picked it up, the handwriting was unfamiliar. Inside was a short note. "Thank you for standing up. You reminded all of us we don't have to stay silent. A neighbor." I read it 3 times, the words blurring slightly as tears filled my eyes. All along I thought I was fighting for myself, but maybe I had been fighting for everyone in that building too. As the Martins faded into obscurity, our building began to feel like a community again. Neighbors lingered in the lobby to chat. Kids played in the courtyard without parents worrying about interference. Even the board meetings became less hostile, more focused on actual improvements instead of petty power games. I had survived the Martin storm, but more importantly, I had helped restore balance to the place I called home. Still, I knew one chapter remained, not about them, but about me. Their downfall was over. What came next was about rebuilding, healing, and stepping into a life no longer defined by fear. The day after the Martins moved out, the building was quiet in a way I hadn't experienced in months. Not the suffocating quiet of dread, but the peaceful hush that comes after a storm. For the first time in ages, I brewed coffee without checking my peephole. I opened my curtains wide, letting the sunlight flood in without worrying about eyes glaring at me from across the hall. Life slowly regained a rhythm. My double shifts at the hospital were still grueling, but when I came home, I knew peace waited behind my front door. No more whispered threats, no more notes taped to the glass. The silence of my apartment finally felt like rest, not isolation. The neighbors began to emerge too. People I'd only exchanged polite nods with now stopped to chat. Sandra and Kevin often came by in the evenings, bringing leftover lasagna or bottles of wine. We laughed about things that had nothing to do with the Martins. It felt like breathing again, like we were rediscovering what it meant to live together, not against each other. One afternoon, Mrs. Patel knocked gently. In her hands was a small potted plant. "Peace lily," she said. "It thrives after storms, just like you." Her words warmed me more than she probably realized. I placed the plant on my windowsill, its green leaves stretching toward the light. At the next board meeting, the atmosphere was unrecognizable. No shouting, no hidden agendas. People debated renovations and budget allocations, but the edge of hostility was gone. When Sandra proposed a community garden on the roof, the idea was met with enthusiasm instead of sarcasm. For the first time, I saw our building not just as a structure, but as a home we were shaping together. I knew, though, that the Martins' absence was not a blank space. It was a scar. Their harassment had left a mark on all of us. I could see it in the way neighbors hesitated before speaking up, as if waiting for someone to cut them down. But scars are proof of healing, too. They remind us we endured, that we fought back. For me, the deepest healing came slowly. There were nights when I replayed everything. The forged eviction notice, the whispers in the lobby, the isolation I felt when no one dared to take my side at first. Anger flared, then subsided into something softer. Not forgiveness, not yet, but acceptance. They had tried to take my home, and instead they had lost theirs. That was justice enough. One evening I sat on the balcony with Sandra. The city lights flickered in the distance, and the air smelled of jasmine from the courtyard. "Do you ever wonder if they regret it?" she asked. I sipped my tea, thinking, they have to. But even if they don't, I don't need their regret to validate what happened. I know who I am. I know I belong here, she smiled. That's the strongest revenge, you know. Living without fear. Weeks turned into months, and with each passing day, the Martins became less of a presence and more of a cautionary tale. I heard whispers that they had moved into a small rental far outside the city, their finances crumbling. A neighbor who worked at the same real estate firm confirmed Mr. Martin was struggling to find stable work. Mrs. Martin's design business, once her pride, had gone silent. They had wanted me out, but it was they who had been erased from the community. I didn't celebrate their misery, but I didn't mourn it either. They had chosen their path, and I had chosen mine. My path was one of resilience, of reclaiming space, of proving that no one could write me out of my own story. One Saturday, I hosted a small dinner for the building. Everyone brought something. Sandra made her famous chicken casserole. Kevin brought a cheesecake. Mrs. Patel brewed spiced tea. We pushed tables together in the lobby, laughter bouncing off the walls. As I looked around, I realized this was the truest victory. Not just surviving, but thriving. Not just reclaiming my home, but transforming it into something bigger than myself. After everyone left, I lingered in the lobby, gazing at the empty plates and crumpled napkins. I thought back to that night months ago when I found the forged eviction notice on my door, my hands shaking, my heart racing. If I could go back and whisper to that terrified version of myself, I'd tell her, "You're stronger than this storm. You'll come out not just standing, but shining." The Martins had tried to make me disappear. Instead, they revealed my strength. And in fighting back, I had given my neighbors permission to find theirs, too. And if my story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they too deserve respect and unconditional love. Because sometimes, the sweetest justice isn't in watching your enemies fall. It's in realizing they could never take away the home, the peace, or the strength you built for yourself.